In this video, I'm going to show you how I prepped my barn floor for concrete. And in my case, I'm doing an in-floor heat. So I'm going to have foam, 2-inch foam on the bottom and 2-inch foam 2 foot down on the sidewalls. So I'll show you how the system I use to get my sand nice and level and get ready to install the foam before I install my tubing, and then I'll show you the pour. Before we go any further, I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel. I would greatly appreciate that. So let's get started. Alright, the first thing I did in the spring when I set my poles is I had all my sand dumped in, get that all leveled out, compacted good. I got my poles up, I got the roof on, barn's getting almost close to being finished. You can do this before or after you put your sides up. But then I dug 2 foot down along the perimeter of the barn. I installed the 2-inch foam board you see there.
So the best way to cut the thick foam board is with a table saw or a circular saw. The sand dug out pretty easily. It was already compacted very well, so none of the sand fell in the hole as I was digging. I just used some long roofing nails to nail the board in place. And then when I backfilled, I made sure I was putting some on both sides pretty evenly so it didn't get bent out of shape. And then I just stamped it down really good with my feet, and then I came back later with the compactor and compacted over it again.
We'll start leveling my sand to get it ready to pour. So I use the stake and pipe system. So I got a 2x4 stake here. It's got 2 screws on top after I get it drove in the ground to hold my pipe. So my pipe will slide along as I go. So I'll have pipes every so often in order to get the screed board on. But to get the sand ready, there's a little trick. You take your screed board and you make it into a giant rake. And I'll show you that. So here I have my screed board and I have 2x4s screwed or nailed into it every foot. And what I've created is a giant rake. So now I can pull this along on my pipes. So the top of my pipe is set at the height of my concrete. And in this case, my tines on my rake are 6 inches long. So I'll have 2 inches of foam, 4 inches of concrete. So you set your pipes in place, you take your rake, pull it along, and you just keep pulling it along until you get your level of sand in the right spot. You might have to rake some out, dump some in. If you dump more in, make sure you compact it first. Go over it again. It takes a lot of going back and forth to get it just right. So you can see here, this section is pretty good. That section over there, I got a lot to pull out yet. I can just visibly see that I got a big pile of sand there. It's got to come out. So I'm just going to pull that out, scrape it out, move that other pipe down, and I'll do the same thing. I'll just keep working my way across. Okay, once I have the sand just about level with the giant rake that I built, I'm just going to take a flat 2x4 and just kind of make some sweeping passes just to make sure it's completely flat. If I was just going to pour concrete directly on top of the sand, I wouldn't worry about that, but because I'm putting the 2-inch foam boards down, I want to make sure it's flat so there's no cavities underneath the foam board. So this will just fill in any little holes or knock down any high spots.
Well, it was a little tricky around my floor drains. I had to notch out my foam board, and then I had to kind of shave underneath because it took a couple of feet to get my drain tile down deep enough in the sand here. So just had to shave around it a little bit, but I'm taping all the seams just with some packing tape, and that's just so after I pour the concrete, if there was a gap in any of these foam boards, I don't want to come back and look and see that there's concrete that seeped down and left a gap there. So I'm just going to seal all the seams off to avoid that. And it sticks pretty well. I just take a rag and just make sure that it's nice and clean before I stick it down. And it works pretty good. For any large gaps, like around some conduits and such, I just use some straight stuff, expanding foam, just to fill that in good. This packing tape's a lot cheaper than the actual foam board tape, and for this purpose it works out really good. Where these tubes come up, there's going to be a partition wall. My boiler, pump, and controls will be located there. I plan on keeping my barn heated to about 55 degrees all winter long. The 18-inch spacing that I use is probably the bare minimum, and you might want to space your tubing a little closer than that. Well, I got this side done with the PEX tubing, so what I ended up doing was going about 18 to 20 inches on center with this. It's a 300-foot roll of tubing, and that was just enough to do this section that's 16 by 32 at 18 to 20 inches on center. So that side's done. Now I'm going to do 2 more runs over on the big side, another 2 300-foot loops at about the same distance. This time, if you look, we spaced out all of our clips first, make it a little bit easier. So all the clips are in 4 foot on lengthwise centers and 20 inches on center across. It's probably a good idea to have it engineered by a contractor, which I did not do. And I guess we'll find out next winter whether it heats the floor in the building adequately enough. Okay, so I am just attaching all of my runs together, and I'm going to put an air pressure test on it. The inspector wants to see 100 pounds on it before I pour. You could hook this right to your manifolds, but it's going to be a season or 2 before I actually hook this up. So this is just temporary, just to get the pressure test done. I did the concrete pours on 2 separate days. I poured about 1/3 of the floor the first time, and it was a cold and wet and rainy day, and it just took forever for that concrete to set up. I didn't use any wire mesh or rebar in my barn floor, but I do have fiberglass added to the mix. I've done quite a bit of that in the past for interior slabs, and it seems to have held up very well. I've had some slabs that I've done this way 15 years ago, and there's no cracks in them. So I'm very happy with the fiberglass additive. Hopefully this barn, is the same way. I just didn't want to deal with, risking putting a hole in one of the PEX tubings with the rebar or the remesh. So that's why I opted for the fiberglass. The process I used for finishing was just bowl floating it, and then I took the Fresno, or the finish trowel, on the end of the pole, and I worked it back and forth a few times. In this picture here you can see that it's looking pretty good. I think I went over it 2 or 3 more times after that, but I had a little bit of trouble with this slab because being on top of the foam and being such a cold and wet day, it just took a long time before it would set up. A few days later, we poured the other half of the barn, well, actually the other 2/3 of it. That side was 32 by 32, and you can see it makes it a little easier if you do this before you put your pole barn sides on, because I took the purlins down on the end, and that allowed me to get the bowl float around from both directions to reach across that full 32 feet. You can also see here where the pipe was pulled back, and we threw some concrete up where the pipe was, and that's how that pipe and stake system works. You just keep pulling your pipes back as you go, and that gives you something to run your screed board down, and then the pipes just come out in the end. I will definitely make another video when I hook this system up and test it out for the first season and let you know the performance of it. So I appreciate you watching and following along with the whole series.